This is Chapter 15 of The Guardian of Ailos. The light from within Mina contained so much energy that it simulated the power of a locket. Fearful, the drakes fell back to the opposite edge of the boneyard. Unfortunately, it also took all her energy to stay standing. She found herself kneeling. Her legs couldn't bear the weight of the light much longer. Soon, her enemy would find out, so she released it. A massive wave of light poured out of her. The drakes winced at its power, but other than that, they didn't seem too bothered. The biggest one, the one who found Mina, began to laugh. "Is that all you got?" His gruff voice cracked like lightning over the clearing as he walked over to where she knelt. "Such a pity. I thought we'd get more of a fight. Looks like you still don't have your precious stone." Mina looked up just as a massive claw slammed into her side. A second later, she heard a snap as her back made contact with the tree. Pain shot through her body. Luckily for her, the shield on her back took most of the impact. She groaned as she fought to stand up, using the tree for support. She wiped her nose. Blood. Instincts had her hand reaching for her sword, but she didn't find it, and before she knew it, a drake rammed its head into her stomach, forcing all of the air out of her lungs. She crumpled to the ground, gasping for breath, clutching her stomach. "Please," she prayed in the other tongue. "Give me strength." All three of her enemies laughed as they surrounded her once again. "She thinks the Maker will save her," the leader scoffed. "Won't she learn?" the little one with the Weasley voice replied. Mina tried to summon the light once more. A desperate attempt, but even one drop of light would help. Her skin felt the tingling sensation of power returning. That time, she focused it inward to heal. At first, it wasn't much, but then, her lungs filled with air. She survived the monsters without her locket before, but she yearned to do more than just survive. Again, she reached down deep, letting the power of the light within her fill her body. Bones reset, and her pain evaporated. "Look, sir, it seems like she wants some more," the third drake snarled. Mina lifted herself up against the tree, doing her best to fake injury. "Looks like I'm not too smart," she said, scanning her surroundings. "I just don't know when to stay down." Then she pulled a hand axe from her belt. Her enemies laughed. Exactly what she hoped for. "I'd say so," the leader growled. "What's she gonna do with that?" the weasel joined in. "Scratch me itch?" While the gang of drakes laughed, Mina spotted her sword. It lay on top of the fallen tree in the center of the clearing. But that wasn't the only thing she spotted. High above the trees, a light twinkled like a star. At first, it didn't make sense. There were no stars in Pyrnos, and the light seemed to be growing brighter. She smirked as she realized it wasn't a star. It was Nelson's locket. She didn't have to win. She just needed to survive long enough for Nelson to arrive. And that she could do. A smile widened across her face. "What are you smiling about?" the old one scoffed. "Oh, nothing," she said. "Just make sure to tell your master we'll see him soon." All three of their faces went blank. As they looked at each other for the answer to her riddle, Mina ran toward the little one on her right. Off balance and surprised, the beast took a wild swing at Mina. She was counting on it. The attack left enough room for her to slide under. Once she made it past, she dashed for her sword. The old drake roared in anger. Mina knew he would be right behind her. She could hear his footsteps gaining, the earth shaking. As she neared the tree, she dove, throwing herself over the sword, grabbing it in mid-air. She landed just as the monster lunged for her. Sword in hand, she leapt up in the air, twisting as he passed beneath her and plunging the sword into the base of his neck, the only place soft enough to penetrate. Mina pulled out her sword, covered in black, ink-like blood, and somersaulted off as the body slid to a stop in the mud. 1 down, 2 to go. Mina stood, poised, ready to fight, as the remaining drakes growled and stalked toward her. They spread out, trying to flank her, so Mina stepped back. She didn't waste any time. As soon as the drakes broke into stride, she ran as fast as she could toward the fallen tree. All 3 of them, in sync, and scheduled to arrive at the same time. But instead of diving, like the last time, Mina stepped up and threw herself into the air. The 2 drakes slammed into each other just as Mina took hold of Sheila's talon and disappeared into the night. Nelson had never felt more alive, the wind rushing through his hair, Sid holding on tight to his waist. He might as well have been in a dream. It did take him a bit to figure out just how to ride Sheila, but once he settled in, they were one with the air. "You okay back there?" Nelson asked, turning to look at Sid. She looked up with a nervous smile and nodded. "Mm-hmm," she said. Nelson laughed. "I guess there is something you're afraid of." Sid grabbed onto him tighter. "You doing okay down there?" Nelson leaned over the side of the dragon bird. Mina's head popped out from behind one of Sheila's claws. "Woohoo!" she yelled, throwing out her arms like she was flying. So maybe a bit of Mina was still in there. Nelson laughed and shook his head. They circled around the clearing and then flew past the midnight forest and toward Mount Pyre. Nelson?" Mina shouted up. "The cave is the other way." "Not going back there," Nelson shouted over the turbulent wind. "The army's almost there, and we have a dragon to stop." Mina looked surprised, but Nelson knew it was only because, for the first time during the whole trip, he was the one suggesting a dragon hunt. "I know," Nelson shouted. "It's weird to me too, but I'll explain when I find a place to land this thing." Mina's eyes widened, and she shrugged. "Aye, aye, Captain." Nelson picked out a flat piece of ground on the side of the mountain and set Sheila down. After everyone dismounted, Mina swooped up the kids in a massive hug. When she finally released them from her grip, she knelt down and looked Nelson in the eye. Her gaze switched from joy to concern. "Okay, explain. What were you thinking coming back for me? I told you to stay put. And Sid." She turned and gave Sid the same look of concern. "You were supposed to go back to Ailos." I know. I just..." Sid hung her head, but Mina lifted her chin before it reached her chest. Nelson interrupted her thought. "It was my decision. I knew you were in trouble after seeing the light in the forest and hearing the voices from the locket. Plus, the army was already climbing the mountain and..." "Army?" Mina stopped him. "You mean they know where the cave is?" Nelson nodded. "This is worse than I thought," Mina continued. "It's okay, though. We made sure to shut the dragon's door, just like you said," Sid said. Mina sat back on her heels and took a deep breath. She looked content, but tired. "Well then, you did good." She took Nelson's hand. "Thank you." Mina," Nelson started. "Please, call me Rose," Mina interrupted. "My real name." "Rose," he repeated. "That's right. Sorry, here," he said, removing the locket from around his neck. "I kept it safe." "You did more than that, dear Nelson," Rose insisted, gladly receiving the locket and placing it around her neck. "You displayed the bravery and wisdom of a king." Nelson blushed. "I just didn't want Sid to lose you again. I know how hard it is to lose a parent, and I couldn't imagine having to go through that twice. He looked over at Sid and saw her wipe away a tear. She sniffed and turned to her mom. So do you know where we go from here? Unfortunately, no. This whole mountain is a blur to me still. Maybe we should have a look in that book of yours for a map. Rose stood up and looked out over the forest. Far off into the distance, she spotted the army of lights. Is that the army you were talking about? Yeah, Nelson answered, walking up next to her. I thought this place was just for our Ailos, though. Where did they come from? Well, transforming into a dragon wasn't the only thing Ailos did when he waged war against the kingdom. As a shapeshifter, he persuaded many men to join his campaign. At first, he preyed on men that had experienced the same loss he had. He promised them freedom from pain, as well as eternal life. And they believed him? How? Sid asked. He was very cunning, and he used all of his creative power to convince them. He even transformed his closest followers. You mean those things that you were fighting? They used to be human? Nelson asked. That's right, Rose confirmed. But what about the shapeshifter that impersonated you? Sid asked. Ailos found a way to imitate the lockets by taking the breath of the maker and fusing it with the stone. He was able to meld it with the heart of his follower. It is a very intense procedure, though, and many people either remain in the form he gives them, or, well, they don't make it. Why would they ever think that would be better? Nelson asked. Because, Sid said, her face somber, they lose their memory, right? She looked over at her mom, who just finished wiping her own tear. That's right, she replied. No one knew what to say next. The reality seemed too dim. A few long seconds passed before Rose cleared her throat. What do you say? She tried her best to change the mood. Let's have a look at that book. Thanks for listening to Chapter 15 of The Guardian of Ailos. As a reminder, we'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment or head over to our Substack and follow us there. And we'll be right back next week with Chapter 16.